Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Anna Catherine Mansfield, and I'm an associate professor of enology at Cornell. I run the Cornell Enology Extension Lab, and my student Sarah Wagner, who is a master's candidate last year through a grant from the Empire State Development, did a pretty in-depth survey of brewery tasting rooms in New York in collaboration with Paul Leone. So we have got some really, we think, interesting information that's quite specific to the types of customers that you have in New York State. She's going to be talking about the methods that we use to gather this information and the interesting and somewhat surprising findings that we found. As I mentioned earlier, if you have any questions throughout this webinar, you've got a little chat bubble down at the bottom of your screen. Just click on that and a dialog box will open and you can type your question in. Sarah is unable to see those, but I can, so I will be reading those for her at the end of the webinar so that she can answer them. If you have any problems hearing us, please let me know in that chat box as well, and I will do my best to help you. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Sarah, and we'll get started. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I hope that you're having a good evening and no one has totally blown away yet in this storm. So today we are looking at the survey that was done last year that looked at consumer experiences in New York breweries, and then the kinds of purchase decisions they made after they went to New York brewery tasting rooms. New York breweries are a pretty important part of the economy here in the state. So from a 2016 survey of breweries, there were 320 breweries. Oh, okay. Are you unmuted? Let me see. I can move this closer. Oops. Let's see. Is it just too quiet or is it not coming through at all?
So we've heard that someone's having trouble hearing Sarah. Is it just that it's too soft? It's better now? Okay.
Oh, okay.
Wonderful.
All right. So with these 320 breweries, there are an estimated more than 11,000 jobs. So that's even an older number. As you can see, that one's from 2013. So there are more jobs than that being produced with breweries, more than 1 million barrels being brewed, and an economic impact in the state of more than $4 billion. Now that includes everything from the sale of beer, the taxes that are being collected, the wages being paid, the transportation costs of products, but as you can see, that's of huge importance to the state of New York. So what this study was looking at was to look at the components of a consumer's experience when they went to a New York brewery that might affect their sense of satisfaction in that experience, whether they might come back, whether they were going to spend a lot of money while they were there, and then to see as that satisfaction changed, if it went up and down, if they paid more or less money while they were there, and then by how much that changed. So there have been lots of studies like these done in different retail settings. It's a pretty common thing to do in grocery stores, in retail settings like malls. So this is not an uncommon setup. but it hadn't been done in breweries and not in New York specifically. So this was the thought process behind setting up the study. So first, previous studies have shown that customer satisfaction levels are directly related to sales. So that's the sort of studies that have been done in grocery stores and malls and restaurants. So we will do a survey to look at the different kinds of satisfaction that are being that people experience when they go to a New York brewery, and we will attempt to correlate those kinds of satisfaction with the kinds of sales data that these people produce when they come to a brewery. So that way that breweries will have some kind of actionable data that they can use to see what matters when people come into their brewery that affects their sales. So we used a survey as an instrument to investigate this, to ask what part of the tasting room experience or the brew pub experience. Some places that the survey went out to were more restaurant type places than pure tasting rooms. Shapes the customer's sense of satisfaction, and then how does that sense of satisfaction relate to their purchasing decision? So the survey and its application method were based on a study of winery customers by Dr. Miguel Gomez and Marin Shapiro that was done in 2012, right here in the Finger Lakes as well. And they got very useful information for the wineries here in the Finger Lakes. So this is the number of breweries we had. We had 21 breweries altogether. You can see in the different areas of New York. They came from all over. We weren't able to recruit any breweries from either the Thousand Islands or Long Island, though we tried. Just nobody was interested in participating. But we did get people in Manhattan and then all over the state. And we used this sort of breakup of the areas because it was produced by the tourism board, and it was similar to the idea that we were going for. We weren't looking so much for either political breakups of the city, of the state, or purely geographical, but really for people's sense of the state as different places of reasons to go to, because a lot of reasons people go to the breweries are related to tourism. So the breweries got stacks of surveys, and they were asked to hand them out to customers over a 4-week period in 2017. Again, 21 breweries ended up participating. These were a wide variety of breweries. Some had been long established. Some were getting started the year before the survey. And you can see that there was a wide variety of production capacity as well, from just over 1,000 gallons to over 1 million gallons, just that one brewery. We got more than 800 respondents that filled out complete surveys. And then again, no surveys came in from Long Island or the Thousand Islands particularly. But for Long Island, we did have Manhattan, and we did have one from Staten Island. And the Thousand Islands, we did have breweries in the Adirondacks, and those are similar areas. So this is what the survey looked like when people got it. It is a little overwhelming, so let me break down what the different parts are. So this is the first part. This is where we asked people basically about their satisfaction. You can see the different metrics on the left, and then we asked people to rate on a scale of 1 to 5 their rating of each of these tasting room metrics, and then a not applicable as well. So people weren't answering just excellent or poor if they really didn't experience a certain part of the brewery. The next part really looked into why people came to the brewery. It both asked the intentions, so you can see at the top it says to have fun, to learn about beer, to purchase beer, and then at the bottom it was more about looking at what kind of advertisements might have reached people. Those are things like I read reviews, I found the brewery on an app. It did ask people to input with free writing if they read about the brewery on a website. So people did input things like Yelp or Facebook or Google. But in the end, there was not a lot of, people didn't put in a lot of information there or check off that they read a lot about the breweries online. And pretty much everybody said that they came to the brewery to have fun. So section 3 was free response, and this is where we looked for the demographic information of the participants. We looked for gender and age. We used the zip code as a proxy for where people came from, whether they came from in state or out of state, and then we asked them what level of education they attained. Section 5 was where we looked for all the purchasing information. So we asked them, did they purchase beer after they had their tasting? And we asked them in what packaging they purchased beer, how much they spent, if they would intend to return and purchase more beer, either from the brewery and then they had a variety of places they could check that they might purchase beer from again. And then we asked as well, at the very bottom, how often they drank beer and how often they drank craft beer to see if they were valuable customers, if they were, drank this kind of product frequently or very infrequently. And then the very last section was just a free response. It asked people to input what they liked best and what they liked least about the experience of the brewery that day. This is a pretty common part in surveys. It was definitely useful to the breweries that gave out this survey to see very specific information that was given back, but this was not statistically input into the results because the answers were had too wide a variety. But it also kept the other information in the survey a little cleaner by letting people express opinions that they might have that weren't asked about in other places on the survey, but let them put it down in the survey somewhere so they felt like they were heard. So the survey was given between February 1st and February 28th last year in 2017. This was great because it was not so busy, so employees at the brewery weren't too burdened by asking people to fill this out and answer questions they had and taking care of these stacks of paper and extra paperwork. But the con of that was that it was not so busy and some places had trouble getting enough people who were interested in filling out this big piece of paper. So this is sort of what it is here. In order to not really be a burden on breweries, it maybe depressed the response rate a little. But by having such a good response by the number of breweries who were interested, we still got a very high response rate in total. We asked the breweries to have a goal of about 40 surveys to have filled out by the end of the 4 weeks, so about 10 a week. And we got between 13 and 53 responses back per brewery. with a mean of 37 per brewery. So that was pretty good. Participants were eligible to fill out the survey if they came to the brewery on the day they took the survey and they tried at least one beer. So they couldn't be the DD, and they couldn't be a little kid that came along, and they couldn't have come 2 years ago and just filled it out today. But other than that, as long as they showed up, tried something, they could take the survey. And of course, the survey was entirely voluntary. And as Cornell, we didn't offer any incentive to take the survey, so we didn't pay people any money. We didn't give them any gift cards or anything like that. But if the brewery wanted to offer people an incentive, say like an extra tasting of beer, they were free to offer one. As far as I know, none of the breweries did that, but that would have been okay. So the way the survey was given, we aren't guaranteed a random sample, which is ideal when you're doing a survey, because we didn't ask people, say, to give the survey to every 10th person who came in, or the first person who walks in the door, because that would have been particularly burdensome on the breweries that we were asking to just voluntarily do this work for us. But we do hope, because it was such a large sample, that it is representative anyway. We talked to the breweries who handed out this sample about the fact that all kinds of people needed to get the survey, men and women, older and younger customers who were both satisfied and unsatisfied, and both new and regular customers. But there certainly is the possibility that particular employees or particular breweries, there may have been, we depend on how each employee understands those requests and instructions to, and how they'll deploy them. So that's why we really pursued a very large sample size in this case. I think we had maybe 3 times the respondents of the winery study that was done in 2012. So what we found when we got all these responses back, and after we put in 800 paper surveys into Excel, was that the vast majority of the ratings that customers gave breweries in New York were 4s and 5s. And that the overall score, which was when people were asked, what did you feel about this winery overall, that score was 4.9 out of 5. So people were very happy when they were at the breweries, when they were asked to judge their experience. Whether or not that has to do with the fact that they just got done drinking, that's a question, but that's how they felt anyway. The average of the gender breakdown was 58% were men, 42% were women. The average age was 41 years old, 0.2. That's the 0.2 is a little bit of a statistical artifact, but you can see that it's mostly middle-aged, and approximately 10% of the participants were from out of state. So the vast majority of people came from within the state. They may still have been tourists, but they weren't coming from out of state. So by these metrics, the most common participant was a male middle-aged New Yorker. So we took these numbers that we got, And you saw the large list of things we asked about. But it was unlikely that that large list, each one of those metrics was going to affect how much people purchased. So we ran some statistics called factor analysis that asked how closely related are each of those metrics to each other. So for example, when people feel really strongly about the cleanliness of the bathrooms, do they also feel really strongly about how nicely the lighting is? Or with the quality of the beer tasting, they also feel really good about the volume of the beer that's being poured. So there are things that are just very closely related. And when you run the factor analysis, it goes from 24 metrics to 5 factors. And that just sort of lumps the metrics together for things that always go up or down together. And so you get these 5 factors, the first one being and then we created these sort of names for them that sort of describe the things that all got lumped together. So the first one had to do with the brewery interior ambiance. So that's things like the lighting, the sounds, the restrooms. Factor 2, the interactions with brewery employees and servers, their knowledge, their friendliness, and their neatness. Factor 3 was beer tasting. So that's the actual experience of the beer people were getting, its quality, the volume, how much they're paying for it. The retailing, so that's your retail space, whether people are able to find things easily, how much there was to choose from, whether it was neat in appearance. And then factor 5 was the location, and that only has 2 things in it. That's the signage and how easy it is to find, and then the outward appearance of the brewery. So factor 1 and factor 2 were the 2 factors that had significance when it came to affecting the purchasing decisions. So they each affected about 10% of people's purchasing decisions, both in what they spent and how much they spent. So we'll come back to that. We're going to look a little bit more into each of what's in these factors, but that's an important thing to know, that factor 1 and factor 2 are the ones that ended up in this survey having statistical significance as affecting the purchasing decisions. And so this gives some a little bit more detail on that. This is how much more they spent. They spent $4.61. They bought 22 more ounces of beer, and they were 11% more likely to make a purchase. And the $4 is, to give that some context, on average, a customer spent $20 in a brewery. And that question was phrased to ask the participants how much they spent on alcohol, because some of these breweries were in the form of restaurants, so people often were purchasing food as well. So they were spending $20 just on beer. So $4.61 is a significant uptick from just $20. So that's what moving your overall score, if you were at a 4 to a 5, looks like. So if we look at the brewery ambiance, which is sort of what's in factor 1, these are the average scores for all of New York State. You can see that they are very high in general. No average score was below 4 in any of these metrics. you can see where sort of people find the great things with the helpfulness of staff. This did end up in factor 1, though the next factor has more with people, and that has even higher numbers. But something like brewery noise and sound is the lowest here. And you might find that that is something that people might have more complaints about. So these are what went into that metric, and these are the kinds of things that are people are looking at when they're making purchasing decisions, perhaps not consciously, but this is what we found that made a statistical difference. So the lighting and the sound and the cleanliness of restrooms almost certainly has to do with people's comfort and their sense of whether or not beer being a consumable product is going to be of high quality because it's being served in a clean and pleasant environment. The same thing is found in grocery stores and restaurants. So it's a little bit more like that than it is like a retail location. So this is the other factor that had statistical significance. This had to do with the interaction between servers and the customers. So you can see, again, scores are super high. People have really high expectations here, and they're generally being met. The server's friendliness, this is the highest score that's possible, and it's the highest score that is given. In the averages here, no other one gets a perfect 5. So on average, employees that interact with customers are getting are really hitting the mark. So I think what breweries can keep in mind when they see something like this is that the bar is set really high, and if you miss it, you're really in danger of losing the bump up in sales that you get when you go from an overall score of 4 to 5. And because there's not a lot to gain here because people's expectations are already really high. So for the beer tasting, you can see again, sort of compared to all these other scores, all these 4.7s, that's right in the middle. That might show that consumers have maybe a hard time telling apart breweries from one another, that people are coming to the breweries to become more educated, but they're not quite there yet. But that's great. That's perfectly fine for them to be coming there and learning. Lots of people checked off in the box that asked for the intention of coming to the breweries, that they came to learn. And I will note here that the only number here that's a little odd might be the beer flight fee. Lots of people, rather than checking a number, simply wrote in their flight fee. So we do have just less information there than we have for all these other scores, because it was just not well understood by people who filled out the form. And then for the retail, these scores get a little lower. There is lots of variation between how breweries retail their beer. Some breweries have almost nothing that is available in a traditional retail manner. You just go to the bar and you ask them to fill a growler. Some have extensive retail operations with beer in cans and bottles, and then lots of other sort of retail merchandise like t-shirts and other kinds of even non-beer related merchandise. But you can see that when it comes to these areas, there's certainly room compared to the state average for any one brewery to make some headway if they were interested in it. But in this survey, we did not find that this statistically affected people's purchase decisions. So that, for example, what it seems to be in this survey is that if people intended to buy something, they bought it, whether that meant asking for help finding it or even if it wasn't beautifully arranged. But it's hard to know if in another way this survey might have been set up if we would have found significance. Certainly in other retailing surveys, these kinds of metrics have been important. So I wouldn't see this score as a reason to put zero importance on retailing presentation and ease, but simply that it's not the top priority. But it certainly does suggest that if a brewery was interested, they could set themselves apart from other breweries. And then here was the lowest scores across the board for New York State breweries, was location. It seemed like people had some difficulty finding their ways to some of the breweries. There was high variation in these. Some places got very high marks, some places got 1s and 2s, and so I would suggest that it's also something to consider that this survey was only taken by people who managed to find the brewery, and that some people might not have managed to find some of the more out-of-the-way breweries. So I would definitely make sure people could find your brewery. That was also mentioned in a number of the free responses, that breweries were far away. You're not going to move your brewery, but you might make sure people can get there with ease, and that people don't get lost on their way. And then the appeal of the brewery exterior. This is a similar number to the retailing, that if it really struck a brewery that they were interested in setting themselves apart, there's room there on the state average. But again, these are not statistically significant in affecting consumers' reasons to purchase. So overall, the score was very high, which showed that the participants were very satisfied, and that the breweries in New York are doing a very good job, and that they set the bar very high for when customers come back or when they go to another brewery. So in general, New York breweries are doing a very good job in producing satisfied customers. If a brewery is interested in looking to improve the satisfaction of their customers, the first two factors, factor 1 and 2, are where they'd want to focus their resources for improvements. So the first factor would be improving the interior space of the brewery for customer comfort. So that's, again, factor 1, which includes about 10% of the customer's purchasing decision. In the free response section, we did capture a number of particular complaints that clearly related to this section, things about cold rooms. It was February when this survey went out. Inadequate bar space, uncomfortable seating, things about the restroom line being long, just a variety of things like that that were definitely particular to individual breweries, but also also just general to a busy food retail space. But any of those that can be addressed would be increasing people's satisfaction in this area. So if you are getting people in your brewery who mention particular complaints like these with their sort of physical experience of the space, that would be something to listen to and to act on, because that would fall into factor 1 here. And then factor 2 would be training the staff to provide friendly and knowledgeable service. Again, for the most part, the breweries got excellent scores on this. So this is clearly already being done, and it's about maintaining this, because you wouldn't want to lose the ground that has already been gained. In the free response section, we captured lots of people saying good things about servers that they had, listing their server by name, and saying particular things that happened that they appreciated. And not once in the 800 surveys did people say a negative thing that happened between themselves and the server. Now, that's a bit of a double-edged sword. I think that does indicate people had very good experiences generally, but it might also indicate it is hard to elicit negative responses from people even when they have them in this kind of surveying. So if you are surveying your customers and you're doing it in person or in the brewery, you might not capture this kind of feedback. And if this is what you're interested in, you might want to do something that is more attenuated, to do it online or to give them some space so they feel more free to give negative feedback on a server. If you consider the adequacy of your staffing levels, that just lets your staff be able to provide the knowledgeable and friendly service, so they're not too busy. So these are your best bets with this survey: improving your interior ambiance and training your staff. And then some other general numbers here. Again, most people were very happy when they came into the breweries. Only 14% of participants gave anything other than a 5 when they were asked for their overall satisfaction rating. So we are looking at a small number of people whose satisfaction can be moved. Though individual breweries may have more to gain or less, depending on where they are in working on this particular metric. So what really may be at risk is getting lower scores. If you are already performing really well in this area, because if you get lower scores, you're going to lose customers, sales, and money, where you are already performing really well. So once we did this study, we saw that there are fewer women on average that are customers of New York breweries, and we wanted to ask why, and then what could New York breweries do to be more appealing to female customers. because, we saw that only 42% of the customers coming in the door are women, and more than 42% of New Yorkers are women. So it seems like there is an untapped population that breweries can be reaching. So we're going to be doing some focus groups in May. There'll be all female participants who drink alcoholic beverages at least once a month, but not necessarily that drink beer once a month, because we want to see why women are choosing what they drink and why they choose that. And we're going to use those focus groups to investigate what kind of brewery characteristics and how breweries market themselves that are appealing to women and will help lead them to purchase either beer when they're there or beer that you might market in other retail spaces. So these are just some of the people that have helped in my research and the places that have given me funding, especially the Empire State Developments. They gave a great grant for this, and then the breweries and the employees that handed out these surveys and did an excellent job and really made this possible. So now if there are any questions, I am happy to answer those.
Yes, we haven't had any questions yet in the chat box, so if anybody has one, I would ask you to go ahead over there and type that in so I can transmit them to Sarah. While we are waiting, I want to thank you for your time and let you know that this session has been recorded and it will be made available. We're going to put it up on a web page so we can get it to everyone. I see that someone has asked if they were able to get a copy of the slideshow. And yes, we are going to make this available. We will probably distribute it through the New York Brewers Association, which I assume is how you got the announcement for this session. So you will soon, in the next week or so, get information about how to access this. We also, in conjunction with this study, Sarah did another study where we looked, we're very interested in sensory evaluation and how consumers interact with sort of sensory descriptors of beverages. We usually do wine, but we're doing a little bit of beer now too. She did a series of studies with focus groups with consumers who were beginner, intermediate, and advanced knowledge of beers and crafts, New York craft beer in particular, and we do have a PDF of a report of her findings from that that might help you when you're designing your tasting sheets and your tasting rooms or just training your employees to interact with folks. Let's see. So far, I don't have any other questions. Anybody else? I'll give you another few minutes if anybody would like to type anything in. I also wanted to let you all know that we are in the process right now of hiring a brewing extension person. In the past, we really have just had mostly a wine team that has slowly had to branch out to do cider and spirits, and we don't feel like we're capable of doing beer as well. So we will be hiring a person who will be dedicated to doing this sort of work for all of the breweries in the state. And so if this is the kind of thing that you like, these webinars, we will hopefully be able to offer more of these. Any feedback that you can give us would be great. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing anything come up. Nope. Wonderful. Well, thank you for your attention. I will, Sarah, what's your email address?
It is smw352@cornell.edu.
Okay, so I have just typed in, if you didn't get that, her email address is smw352@cornell.edu, and she can answer if you have other questions that you think of later. If you send Sarah an email or me, we can answer them. I do have a question for you, Sarah. Val is asking if food choices at the tap room were included in the survey.
We did ask people to evaluate their restaurant experience, and that got a similar score to the overall experience. But because that wasn't the intention of this survey, and not all the breweries had food available, we didn't do any particularly intensive statistics about that. For example, that did not go into the question about if it affected purchasing decisions, because it simply wasn't a part of every brewery. However, it was mentioned in a number of people's free responses, that they really enjoyed their meal, or they asked for specific things to be offered at a brewery, specifically like if a brewery wasn't serving food, that they would serve food, they would serve a particular dish or a particular local item. So that certainly did matter to consumers, but it wasn't the focus of this study, so I don't have really good numbers to give you on that.
Val also would like to know if live entertainment was considered as part of the ambiance.
It was not. We did ask if people came to breweries for an event and part of that intention box, but that was not a common response. So it wasn't one of the metrics we asked about. Instead, we asked about it as one of the intentions, and it didn't come up as a high response rate on that.
Another question: if the median age was 41, what were the lowest and highest for age groups? I'm pretty sure that our lowest was 21.
Yeah. At least nobody admitted being younger. We didn't ask for age groups in like given groups. We just asked people to fill in their age. So I don't remember off the top of my head what was the highest age. I believe we regularly had people in their 70s filling out the survey. And I'm sure I got people in their 80s, though that was less common.
Great. Any other questions? And Val, if you would like specifics on that, again, you can email Sarah, and she'll be glad to send you.
That's definitely numbers I can get very easily.
That's information that we can share. We aren't obviously we aren't able to share information about specific breweries with anybody other than the brewery owner, but we can give you aggregate data if you'd like to dig into that a little more deeply. Wonderful. Well, thank you for your time. And we were really glad we could share this with you all. As I said before, we will be posting this online so that you can come back and hear this recording. And I hope that everybody has a wonderful evening and that we'll be interacting with you again soon with some more brewery information. Good night.
Thank you again.
Did you turn off the recording?
No.
I think it probably